Nestled away in the southeast of England in Kent lies the small town of Sandwich, and in the 18th century, during a lengthy gambling session, John Montague, the 4th Earl of the aforementioned town, asked for a piece of meat between 2 slices of bread, a quick meal that he could eat without stopping his game, and thus the humble sandwich was born. Odd start to the video, but over 100 years later, in the 1930s, Panerai released the Radiomere, widely recognised as the first watch with a sandwich dial, a dial made up of multiple layers to give it more depth. While you can't get a Panerai for under $1,000, do not go buying one for around $400 from China for the love of God. There are plenty of amazing watches with sandwich dials available on a budget, and that's what I'm aiming to highlight in this video. I followed some rules to help guide me as per usual, the first of which is, unsurprisingly, that the watch must have a sandwich dial. Secondly, that it must be available for less than $1,000 at the time of writing, and finally that each brand can only feature on the list once for the sake of variety. With all that said, let's get into the video. The California dial was first developed in 1942 by Rolex. The aim of the dial is legibility, with the transition between Roman numerals in one half and Arabics in the other, helping to quickly differentiate and orientate when telling the time. I would think of it now as more of a design quirk that has simply stood the test of time, and this model from BALTANY does a good job of replicating the vintage aesthetic associated with the design. The sandwich dial adds to that feel, and I have to say I'm quite impressed with the caseback and finishing on the seagull mechanical movement at this price point, especially as you can pick this model up for considerably less than stated via AliExpress. It feels as though Tudor have finally started to have some impact with their trademark on the snowflake hands, as the bigger Chinese brands are no longer featuring them on their dive models. The SN051-G2 is one such example, making use of this hexagonal design instead. The watch also has a steel ring around the inside of the bezel, which puts me in mind of the Trident range from Christopher Ward, and most importantly for a list like this, a sandwich dial, where the loomed indices all sit in cutaways beneath the main dial itself. If I were going to try and define the design philosophy of Zelos, stand out on a budget is probably the best I can come up with. It's harder to find a plain Zelos model than it is one with a gemstone, carbon, meteorite, gradient, or indeed textured dial, and most models have as many angles as physically possible incorporated into the case to ensure it catches the light. The dive models in the SWORDFISH range add a sandwich dial into the mix. It's a case of more is more, but in most cases treads that line in quite a tasteful, legible way. That more is more mentality extends to the number of models on offer. There are so many that it's hard to imagine that most people's tastes aren't going to be accounted for in terms of coloration and materials with this range. I've never added a mod to a list before. It's just too vague, but on this occasion I think it's appropriate. The majority of wearers will undoubtedly treat their watches like their cars and keep them stock for resale value, but also because they trust the designers more than they trust themselves. However, there is a thriving watch modding community out there, and one of the most popular mods is to take a SEIKO model, often an SKX or SRP, on which the price of this listing is based, and add a sandwich dial to it. I personally wouldn't have the confidence to do the modding myself, but there are entire websites and communities out there who will build a modded SEIKO piece to your exact specifications for a fee. The sandwich style on the AQUASCAPHE is a very subtle one. Really, it's just the triangular indices at 3, 6 and 9 that are cut below the rest of the dial. However, in combination with the raised loom pips on the other hours, some depth is created that, while not obvious from a distance, does reward the wearer with a richer time-telling experience and adds an extra dimension to what is already a really classy dive piece. While functionally designed to be a robust tool watch, the vintage aesthetic of this piece makes it stand out from its regular dive watch competition as a far dressier piece that wouldn't look out of place at formal events. This watch was actually the inspiration behind making this video. It features a hand-patinaed bronze dial, and to fully show that off, the bronze has had holes cut into it and is then sandwiched between a layer of sapphire, which carries the indices, minute track, and a back layer which has the loom for said indices. The end result is a highly original and interesting dial, with each watch effectively being a piece unique. When you consider that most brands charge a premium for bronze over stainless steel, the fact this also has a bronze case to match that dial makes this an extremely interesting piece, not only in terms of its looks, but also in terms of value for money proposition. The RZE Fortitude GMT range is a set of bold 41mm pilot watches with a few nods to the aviation industry in their design. You've got a turbine-inspired bezel. The RZE house style of black, white and yellow already matches pretty well with flight instrumentation, as does the print work on the numerals and minute track. While the stated focus is on legibility, those numerals are a lot smaller than you'd find on most pilot pieces. But I like the aesthetic choice, and ultimately how many of these watches are actually going to be worn by pilots who are relying on their wristwatch for navigation at this point? Very few, I'd wager. I almost forgot to mention, really nice textured sandwich dial to this range with cutaways to reveal the indices on the layer beneath. Now, I'm being cheeky in including this as it technically isn't available yet, and a batch is currently on pre-order for later in the year, but it does a couple of unique things with its sandwich style and overall design that I really appreciate, and so I just had to feature it. The most noticeable thing is that the dial appears to be deeper than other sandwich styles. Now, that may just be clever photography, but the sense of depth and shadows cast into those recesses are a lot more notable than other pieces on this list. I also really appreciate the small touches, using the sandwich layer to frame the date, the cutaway in the hour hand to reveal the SHELLBACK print work beneath twice a day. Lovely stuff. From a distance, it is easy to mistake the Brooklyn 36 as a chronograph piece, but its subdials are actually there to display its triple calendar complication. This is a watch that tracks the date, day of the week and month. The pipe hand style dial has all kinds of depth going on to it, with the largest recessed part housing the chapter ring and subdials, the centre part of the sunburst dial above that with the print work and a second track at the outside. On top of that are the indices, which have been applied, and beneath everything sits the date wheel, which is visible at 6 o'clock. It's only 36mm in diameter too, which puts it right into my wheelhouse, and it's definitely a model I'm looking at getting for myself after making this list. I spoke about the pink lemonade version of this watch in my gradient dial video last week, but the O2 series from Studio Underdog ticks more boxes than just colour and is quite an interesting take on a sandwich style compared to most pieces on this list. Instead of a cutaway, this instead has a floating dial with a 1mm thick sapphire disc installed above the main dial and all of the printwork and indices applied directly to the sapphire. This means that said printwork all casts shadows down onto the dial below, creating a really interesting level of depth to the piece, which is only accentuated when the lights go out. So there we have it, what I consider to be the 10 best sandwich dial watches money can buy below the $1,000 price point. I will just say that sandwich dials are not something I have the most personal experience with, and in part this video was a research piece as it's definitely a feature I want to add to my collection. I would therefore love to hear from you about your experiences with sandwich dial watches, especially if you think there are some out there that could, or indeed should, have featured on this list. As a final aside, all these sandwich related images have made me rather hungry. What is your favourite sandwich? Mine has to be a Reuben. Let's discuss in the comments section below. As ever, thank you for your time. If you've enjoyed what you've seen or found it informative, consider dropping the video a like and subscribing for more content like this in future.